held in person and electronically in accordance with the Municipal Act. Consent items. For the consent items, I will read out the title associated with recommended motions printed on the agenda to see if members of committee would like to deal with them on consent or hold them for discussion. Items that are not held will be deemed approved on consent with no further discussion. They will then move forward to the next general committee meeting for consideration. I will move to consent items number 7 on your agenda, reports of advisory committees. There are 4 advisory committee reports to be received. Are there any concerns with any of the advisory committee reports? If none, I will consider them all to be received on consent. I'll just read them out quickly. 7.1, report of the Arts Advisory Committee dated November 25th, 2025. Report of the Youth Council dated December 1st. Report of the Communities in Bloom Committee dated December 2nd. And report of the Sustainability Advisory Committee dated January 8th. Seeing no issues, questions, or concerns, they are all approved. We go back to number 1 on our agenda. There's no public meetings tonight and no open delegations. So that brings us to presentations. And there is one presentation on the agenda this evening. This presentation is by the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority concerning chloride in Lake Simcoe watershed. I would like to call on Don Goodyear, the General Manager of Integrated Watershed Management, and Bill Thompson, Manager, Watershed Plans and Strategies, to the podium to deliver the presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of committee. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Bill and I, as you mentioned, are going to speak to you about chloride in the Lake Simcoe watershed. I'll start off by giving a snapshot of kind of the status of chloride in the lake and the tributaries around the watershed, and then Bill will take over and speak to some of the opportunities to manage some of the challenges that we'll flag for you. So just starting off here, this graph here is chloride concentration measured at Atherley Narrows. The blue dots represent measured chloride concentrations, and you can see a pretty steady incline from the period of record when we started measuring back in the 70s up to most recently 64.2 milligrams per liter this past year. The red line on the top of that graph is the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment chronic guideline. That's the point at which the more sensitive species in the lake are going to suffer some consequences. So you can see we're on a relentless climb towards that line, and we're trying to turn the curve, if you will. So where does that salt come from in the lake? Clearly the tributaries that flow into Lake Simcoe are the source. And what this graph, or pardon me, figure is showing is the trend in chloride concentration over the last 10 years or so. All of the arrows are where the points where we measure chloride and other parameters. You can see we have no down arrows on this map. They're all increasing trends in chloride concentration, and the yellow side-to-side arrows are where we don't have a significant trend. But generally speaking, across the watershed, we're seeing an increase in chloride concentration in all of the rivers that flow into Lake Simcoe. Apologies for the busyness of this slide, but an upward trend is one thing, but what does that mean in terms of how much chloride is there? So what we're conveying in this figure here is how many of the samples taken exceed that chronic guideline that I mentioned in the first graph, 120 milligrams per liter, and what percentage of samples taken over the last decade exceed the acute guideline, which is the point at which some sensitive species cannot survive. So the top number, percentage of samples that exceed the chronic guideline, and the bottom number, percentage of samples that exceed the acute guideline. So you can see some pretty big numbers around the watershed. In the urban areas, they're more significant. And these are samples from all year long. So even in summer conditions, we're getting some exceedances of these guidelines. And I'll just bring your attention down in the Newmarket area, the 94 over 46, that's Western Creek, that I'm going to zoom in on here. It's kind of our perfect storm, if you will. It's not that Newmarket does anything bad. They're actually quite proactive in terms of their roads management, as most of the municipalities across the watershed are. But this is kind of, as I mentioned, the perfect storm for this challenge. It's a very small catchment. It's highly urbanized. The red line encompasses a lot of industrial, commercial, institutional land use. So we've got a lot of hard surfaces that require winter maintenance and not a lot of green spaces to buffer the salty runoff that comes off of those hard surfaces. The picture on the left-hand side of the screen is the instrument that we installed in this creek to get we normally take bi-weekly measurements. Every 2 weeks, take a measurement of chloride concentration manually. We installed an instrument in Western Creek knowing it was a kind of a challenging area to get more frequent concentrations measured. And that's what this graph shows here, is the concentrations measured over a couple of years in Western Creek. And we've got a new threshold to introduce. So way down at the bottom of the screen, the yellow and dashed red lines are the acute and chronic guidelines. That you can see are exceeded most of the time in Western Creek. That new line to introduce is the concentration of ocean water. So at 3 points in the winter last year in Western Creek, the river flowed saltier than the ocean. Obviously not a good thing. It's the kind of thing we think may be happening in other places, but we don't have these instruments everywhere. But certainly this is a challenging spot. One more bit of science nerd stuff before I pass it on to Bill to get into policy and opportunities to deal with it. We wanted to explore the assumption that more salt is better in terms of safety in parking lots and walkways. So what we are trying to show here is on the right, the 60 gram per meter squared is the recommended rate of salt application to maintain a safe surface. But I'm sure we've all seen salt on the ground that looks more like the pictures on the left. Much more salt than is actually required to maintain a safe surface. But is that safer than the minimum required? So we purchased a friction tester to explore that, and don't need to know much about the MU value, but 0.5 or higher is a safe surface. Lower than 0.5 is slippery and unsafe to walk on. So what we can see here is that a minimally salted but still wet surface on the left is very safe to walk on compared to a dry but overly salted surface on the right, because the salt actually acts like marbles. It's slippery underfoot. So not surprisingly, you get more friction, a less safe surface. Similarly, a snowy walkway that's just been shoveled but not salted is about as slippery as an over-salted but dry walkway. And finally, just trying to get a sense of how does this compare to surfaces we walk on every day. We took some measurements on the right, that's the basement of our office, and on the left is a public space nearby. Both of those are less than the 0.5 threshold, but we walk on those every day in high heels and patent leather shoes and what have you without slip, strips, and falls. So we're really kind of pushing the notion here, or trying to dispel the notion here that more salt is better. But we do live in a northern climate, and I'll let Bill take it from here.
So as you heard from Don, salt is a real challenge for Lake Simcoe and its tributaries. But we're not here to say stop using salt. As Don said, this is Canada, we get winter, this year a particularly bad one. So the challenge in front of us is actually a more difficult one of maintaining public safety in winter while also maintaining the health of the lake and its tributaries. Now the good news is there's a number of best practices developed to provide guidance to practitioners on how to achieve that balance. Some produced by municipal organizations like Good Roads, some by industry associations, some by organizations like ours, and some by combinations thereof. The challenge, though, or the reality is that there are real barriers to adoption of some of these better practices, and we hear about them every time we present on this topic. Questions around, if I change my level of service, am I going to expose myself to more liability? What's it going to do to the cost of maintaining this property? And what's public feedback going to be in terms of either constituents or customers to this property? Now, we've been very fortunate over the past number of years, and we've been able to watch a couple of organizations shift from more conventional practices to better practices, to collect some data while that happened, and work up a couple of case studies to look at the costs and benefits from a triple bottom line standpoint of both conventional and better practices. And I want to share quickly with you tonight one of those examples. So this is a big box store in our watershed that they were very generous to allow us to monitor their parking lot for a period of about 10 years. So that included monitoring how they managed the parking lot in the winter, but also the water quality flowing off it into the local stormwater pond. The only thing they ask in return is that they remain anonymous, so we call them Parking Lot C. Now, we got extra lucky over the course of this 10-year period is that they changed their contractor halfway through. They gave us a chance to compare two different operational approaches. So again, keeping anonymity in the forefront, we'll call them Contractor A in the first half of the study and Contractor B in the second half of the study. Now, these contractors had some interesting similarities and some interesting differences. Obviously, they're both managing the same property, had the same client, they had largely the same equipment, and they had the same fundamental interest of keeping their client happy, their business afloat, and public safe. Operationally, though, they differed in really interesting ways. So Contractor A, the first half, is a fairly traditional contractor, practices similar to what we see elsewhere in the watershed, and they have kind of a set application rate of salt to use on this parking lot. So every time there's a winter weather event, they send the truck out with a certain amount of salt and they put that salt on the parking lot. If it's a really bad event, they might send the truck out twice. Contractor B, conversely, used what we would consider better practices. So every time there's a winter weather event, Contractor B sent a person out. And that person used their professional judgment to determine if the weather was indeed about to hit the property, if it might have been a false alarm, or if it might just miss the property on that particular day. They also made an assessment of the amount of residual salt on the pavement. So that allowed them to create a prescription for that property on that day to that winter weather event. And the difference in the two is really striking, as you can see in this figure here. So this figure shows the total amount of salt used to maintain this parking lot on an annual basis over the course of this 10-year period, with Contractor A shown in blue and Contractor B shown in red. So what we saw is, on average, Contractor A, that more traditional contractor, went out more frequently per year and put down more salt when they did go out, with the end result being that Contractor B, who used the better practices, maintained the same surface with half as much salt. Now, you might say every winter is different. Maybe Contractor B got lucky and had lighter winters. That doesn't seem to be the case here. The dotted line in the back of this graph is the total amount of precipitation received in each of the winters. So you can see there's no obvious trend in this. And more to the point, the municipality where this parking lot is located went out more often in the second half of the study than the first half of the study, right? So this doesn't seem to be Contractor B getting lucky. This seems to be Contractor B being very good at their job and using best practices that do work. Our estimate is Contractor B probably saved about $40,000 a year in material costs. We don't have the study underway this year. I think we'd find that number quite a bit higher this year because the cost of salt, of course, is spiking this year. And most importantly, over the course of this 10-year period, there were no slips, trips, and falls in the parking lot and no complaints from either customers to property managers or from the store managers to the contractors. So this does show that it can be done, right? We can maintain paved surfaces in a way that's safe, that reduces our environmental footprint because we're using less salt, and that at least sometimes can save us a bit of money while we're at it. It's not easy, though. You need to have someone who has that expertise to make that professional judgment on the day as to what that surface needs. So contractor training is vital. Good information on the condition of the property is vital. And then contractors need to be empowered to make the decisions that they need to make based on their training, their expertise. So that's what brings Dawn and I here tonight is while we see that best practices do work, we've not seen them being adopted in our watershed as much as we would like. And the reason for that remains liability, probably to no one's surprise. Now, we do think New Hampshire has solved the liability problem, and so we often talk about something we call the New Hampshire model. So New Hampshire has a very similar challenge that we do in that they're seeing increasing chloride concentrations in their freshwater resources, and they have a very similar law that we do. In Ontario, we call it the Occupiers Liability Act, and that act, as I'm sure you all know, says essentially that anyone who owns or manages a property owes a duty of care to people visiting that property to keep them safe while they're there. What New Hampshire did was they amended their version of that law a number of years ago to say that if you can demonstrate that you are a contractor who's taken state-recognized training, you've passed a state-recognized exam, and you follow state-recognized best practices, you're deemed to meet that duty of care. And in fact, the person who hired you is deemed to meet their duty of care as well. And so they're seeing that in New Hampshire is really driving adoption of better practices because this is a massive carrot for contractors to adopt those better practices. And we think this can be applied in Ontario as well. well. Again, we've got a similar issue with Lake Simcoe and other lakes across Ontario. We have those best practices that were developed in Ontario by industry and by municipalities and others. We have a very similar law that New Hampshire does. We have a training and certification program developed here in Ontario called the Smart About Salt program. And most importantly, there's broad support for this approach, not only in groups like ours who are responsible for watershed management, but in industry as well. Contractors and their client base are really supportive of this approach because they're seeing their insurance costs skyrocket over the past number of years. And so that they see this as really providing them some certainty that they can maintain their insurance costs by adopting better practices. So that's why we are here before you tonight. Our board of directors at the Conservation Authority passed a resolution last summer endorsing the New Hampshire approach and recommending that the province of Ontario adopt something similar. And we've been asked to do presentations of this sort to councils and committees across the watershed. So while I have the floor for a moment, though, I will also say there are other things that cities can do to promote the adoption of better practices. One of the things I'd like to recommend is those municipalities who do contract out parking lots, think about requiring your contractors to become trained and certified. And the reason I suggest that is because we still don't have many trained and certified contractors active in the watershed, which makes it very difficult for individual property owners to hire those contractors. So anytime I'm talking to a municipality or a school board that have perhaps a larger portfolio of properties, larger contracts, maybe multiple contracts, I try to recommend that they make training and certification a requirement of their contracts in the belief that that would increase the number of certified contractors on the landscape, therefore making it easier for individual property owners to hire similar trained and certified contractors. Again, the importance of good weather data is critically important for contractors making those difficult decisions. We know municipalities have invested a lot in very sophisticated weather data, including the City of Barrie. So any latitude you have to share that data with your contractors or contractors active in the city, that would help them make these important decisions. And then finally, while we're here talking about parking lots, because that's where the New Hampshire model applies, I think it's worth noting that roads, of course, are another big part, or a big source rather, of pavement across the watershed, and therefore another area that gets a lot of salt. We know as well that a lot of municipalities are doing a lot to reduce their salt usage while maintaining public safety, and Barrie is certainly a leader in that. Barrie, as far as we know, is the only municipality that's done a salt optimization strategy, where staff have gone through their practices with a fine-tooth comb to identify areas where they can tweak what they do to maintain public safety while reducing the amount of salt they use. So certainly staff and council should be congratulated for taking that approach, and I think that approach of continual incremental improvement should be encouraged to continue, because I'm sure your qualified and experienced staff may find other ways to improve practices as time goes on. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you much for your time, and happy to take any questions if the committee has any.
Thank you both for that informative presentation. I will go first to members of committee if there's any questions. And Mayor Nettle.
Yeah, thanks so much, Councillor Hamilton. Thanks for the presentation this evening. I have a few questions, and I guess my first would be, what do the naysayers about the New Hampshire approach say? What's the opposition?
Through you, Madam Chair, I've never heard any naysayers directly, but I do know that there is scuttlebutt, perhaps, that, well, the pushback I've heard has been from the legal community, that lawyers like to be able to defend their clients. The end result, I believe they're finding in New Hampshire, is they're finding other ways to defend their clients, right? That's a good lawyer will always find a way to defend their clients. But on the whole, again, contractors in New Hampshire are very happy with it. Property owners are very happy with it. Insurance companies appear to be open to the idea because, again, they're seeing their costs skyrocket as well. And so this would be a way for them to manage their costs. So the pushback, such as it is, would be from those lawyers representing their clients.
So as much as I believe that lawyers want to defend people to make money, I also believe that insurance companies want to reduce liability to not pay out.
Yes.
So there's two sides to that coin. And I guess my question is, what legal advice or what consultation have you done with the legal community? And you don't want to make rules based on the worst case scenario or the best case scenario. You want to make rules based on what is, most plausible. I would hate to see us say, okay, limit the liability, and then somebody get seriously hurt, no longer be able to go to the insurance company for which the insurance is paid to then deal with the issue. And people would be surprised how often a fall results in a disability, right? It can be just that quick. And so is there, consultation that's been completed to this point? Is there something we can point to on that front?
Again, through you, Madam Chair. So before getting into the consultation piece, I will say that negligence would still be an issue, right? So if someone didn't follow the best practices, didn't take the training, they would still be negligent. And so to your point, yes, in those cases, there would certainly be a strong case against them, but I don't disagree that slips and falls can happen, even under everyone's best intentions. With respect to consultation, we've had something we call the Freshwater Roundtable that we've convened for since 2019. That roundtable includes folks like ourselves. It includes, again, contractors and the client base, but it also includes representatives from the insurance industry, and there is a lawyer on that group from Gowling WLG acting as a pro bono advisor to that group. So while there hasn't been formal consultation in the sense of developing provincial policy, we have had this broad stakeholder conversation that's been ongoing for some years now.
Okay, thanks. Two more questions for you. One is desalination. What type of investments can we make? Because, you're talking about the rivers, but I also looked at the stats, and then you demonstrated it through the urban areas being clearly high contributors to salt inside of Lake Simcoe and inside of the streams, et cetera, that are going down. But probably our highest flow rates would actually come out of our sewage treatment plant, our wastewater facility. What can be done to reduce salt rates at the exit flow?
Excuse me, through you, Madam Chair. That's a great question. I think our data suggests that paved surfaces and winter management is the kind of primary source of chloride concentration in the lake. But you're quite right. There are not insignificant concentrations of chloride within wastewater. Reverse osmosis, quaternary treatment is the only way to take, because it's dissolved, the only way to take chloride out of wastewater. That's an extremely expensive upgrade to wastewater treatment plants and extremely energy intensive, so the operating costs would also be significant. So I couldn't quote exact numbers, but I do know that the Upper York sewage system that was proposed in the southern part of the watershed did suggest quaternary treatment, that reverse osmosis, and the capital cost to build the proposed plant were in the $500 million and up from original estimates.
Okay, that's a $500 million increase in the cost, or was that the total?
$500 million capital cost to build a reverse osmosis treatment plant. To upgrade to reverse osmosis on an existing plant would be in the hundreds of millions.
I'll wait till the end. Probably gonna get asked anyways.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the presenters. In the New Hampshire, so they take education and then there's a monitoring process. Is there an organization that goes out and quantifies the salt purchased, applied, and if they receive the badge or being a certified, thank you. If they fail after they're certified and then they go back to old practices, pounding the salt, is there a penalty or is it just losing the certified?
So through you, Madam Chair, I believe the penalty would be losing the certification. So in New Hampshire, yeah, there is a training program that you would be required to take, and there's an exam at the end of that course. And there is a periodic recertification, be it 3 years or 5 years, that you're required to undertake. It's the state that provides that program. There is some level of auditing, but primarily it's around providing the contractor the ability to defend themselves in court. And so there's a certain level of trust that ensures the contractors follow those best practices and document what they've done, because the ability to protect yourself from a claim, and I've said court, but from a claim even if it's settled outside of court, there's huge financial incentives to that.
And just to follow up, has there ever been a consideration of, like, you look at the ISO 2000, 9001 core certification allows you to tender, and if you don't have it, MTO ratings were another practice that put you on short bid lists and stuff. Has there ever been any consideration to bringing in a certification, and if you lose it, you're unable to tender, or the municipality can boycott you from or suspend you from bidding the work? Has that ever been a consideration?
Through you, Madam Chair, a number of years ago, Smart About Salt Council engaged the Canadian Safety Council to develop such a standard. There was some early exploratory work, and I believe the CSC declined to develop the standard because they didn't see the return on investment for themselves as an organization. So unfortunately, that didn't really progress very far.
Thanks very much for the presentation.
Any other questions from members of the committee? I have one or two as well here. Just, and it's a question actually for staff. I'm not sure who to direct it to without Mr. Ferrari here, but just in terms of current training that any of our contractors take right now with respect to SALT application. Ms. Steinmetz.
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe we don't require our contractors to be Smart About Salt trained at the moment. We do offer the training, and I believe we pay for it for contractors to take it, or at least we did in the past, but I can follow up with you on what the current practice is.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you. And then a question for the presenters. Just you mentioned your advocacy with the provincial government, and as a result of that, you're on a bit of a roadshow right now with municipalities. What was the input from government, or what would you be looking for from municipalities to further that conversation?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. The request that we've been making is a council resolution supporting that limited liability framework here in Ontario. We have at the Conservation Authority Board of Directors penned letters to the Attorney General and the Minister of Environment. So any lending your voice to those pleas is what we're hoping to achieve by this roadshow.
Okay. And just the impacts to date, are they reversible if municipalities improve their performance or behavior in the future, or are we just looking to mitigate any further impact?
Through you, I believe the short answer to that is that salt is persistent in the environment. We have to wait for it to basically flush its way through the system, so to speak. And what we're really hoping to do is just stop that incline that we've seen in both in tributaries and in the lake. As Bill mentioned, we recognize that balancing public safety with these environmental considerations is a challenge. So I'm not sure that we can expect to reverse the trend, but if we can hold it steady to where we are today, I think we'd consider that a win.
Thank you. It is a timely conversation. I think just hearing, given where we're at right now with this winter and the challenges we've been facing, and I think certainly public expectation is a barrier as well. So I find this helpful and valuable, and I think it's a good opportunity to engage with the public. It's been educational for me. So again, spreading that awareness and education I think is important. I'm not sure the education strategy, but I'm sure one exists. But yeah, I am assuming public expectation is a bit of a barrier at this point. Any questions for members of non-committee? I'll go to Councillor Riema first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess just a couple of comments first. I think that a lot of our businesses that own, say, plazas and big parking lots, they really struggle getting contractors to do their plowing work, especially their salting work, because of the liability that's attached to it. And as a consequence, I think that, first of all, contractor prices go up. And also, the insurance cost is a big part of that. And as a consequence, they also put out a lot of salt on much more than they really need to do in order to kind of cover themselves. So I think, from a strictly business point of view, doing something to reduce the amount of salt that contractors are likely to use is a really good start. My question is really toward let me make one more comment, and that is the comment was made on our city streets. I saw some numbers, and I think, don't hold me to this, but I think over the last 20 years, we have reduced the amount of salt that we use on City of Barrie streets per mile by about 2/3. So I think from the public's side of it, we are really making very good progress over these years. Now I think it's time to start thinking about some of the big parking lots that school boards, shopping plazas, industrial areas, so that we really should help them save money, I think is really, and save the environment. I think both of those happen at the same time. Now, my question is to staff is, we have a lot of, and we use a lot of weather information in terms of figuring out how much salt to put on our roads. Do we regularly share, or can we share that information with contractors?
We do have Dave Ferrari on. Is it possible that he can answer that question? No? Okay. I will look into that and get back to you, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Riepma, we do share that information.
Excellent, thank you. I think I saw one more question from Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. Through you, so thank you, Bill and Don. I guess one question would be, I'm thinking about the presentation in two different ways. So one is the ask around this potential adoption with respects to the New Hampshire model. And the other one for me is, what else can we ask if there's this huge variance between getting to that end goal that you have? And so as you're coming out with this ask or proposal, even if people don't get to that end outcome or that's not achieved, where potentially is this campaign also giving targets potentially? And Councillor Hamilton's question made me think about this, which is you've got the rates around salt and chlorine in the water, and we're trying to adjust it down, or at least stop the compound impact of the current rates, at least until, for sake of not being scientific here, like cleaning or titrating out, right? And so is there a percentage by which this would also come in hand with a goal to say, ideally, if you can at least cut your salt usage by a particular percent minimum, it can have a compounding impact across the watersheds that are feeding into Lake Simcoe, where we should start to see a decline over time. So can we give municipalities something that might invite them to knock on the door of the City of Barrie and say, how did you do it? Did you see any increase in liability along the way or not? And to feel like they can do something versus nothing, or that might be too abstract from a policy and legislative approach, that it doesn't change what they can actually affect around changing practices that can be maybe more reasonably done tomorrow, and then it becomes more of a training and communications campaign.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Excellent question, for which I don't have an excellent answer, I'm afraid. There is a research group at Toronto Metropolitan University doing some modeling for us right now to try to answer that question. If we want to maintain a healthy and sustainable lake, how much salt can we absorb, essentially. We don't have an answer to that question yet, but the thought behind that was we could maybe provide some advice to municipalities or contractors in terms of where to set that bar. The thought that hadn't occurred to me until you just posed the question is to use groups like Barrie as a leading example to say, as Councillor Riekma said, if you've reduced your salt use by 66%, thereabouts, that's a great example. And how do we compare that to others in the watershed, either private sector or public sector? So I do think over the coming years, there might be something there. In the shorter term, I do think public education is important, right? Because until I started training my mind to this, I wasn't aware that salt was an environmental issue. It's kind of invisible in a sense, and people don't think about it. They just think about whether they can get to and from work and the condition of the roads. So we've been starting to talk to communication staff in municipalities around the watershed and how we can kind of share resources around public education. And so I know Barrie staff are involved in those conversations that are just now starting. So I think anything we can do between municipalities and the watershed to reinforce each other's messages to the public is an early win for us.
Next couple of questions. Great to hear that. But again, yeah, anything even about like a percentage change could be seen if we collectively adjust, and maybe these are the municipalities in particular that you want to at least target with that have a relationship into some of those waterway systems. The other one might be more of a redirection to staff, because what I'm hearing, Ms. Steinmart, is we've got this beautiful salt use management plan, and we do smart about salt training that we offer for free. So I see that as it's kind of we invite you to the table to do it, but there's no requirement on contracted staff to be taking the training. Could that change, or is there a way to further force leverage on what's being made available to them?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Kungle. So Mr. Ferrari tells me that our contractors are like city staff. So we have a risk management plan that looks at how much salt the city uses. Our contractors are monitored and they adhere to the same practices if they were a city employee, and they take that direction from our forepersons. So they do the same thing. I'm not sure facilities does the parking lots. I'm not sure what their practices are, but for the roads, that's what we do.
And thank you through you. Thank you, Dave. So I guess my final comments all in with that is, sounds like there's a really great opportunity, one, if we haven't, to kind of showcase what we're doing and use that communications to bring other municipalities along. Maybe invite your public stakeholders to be ambassadors. So get a decal on the door, do the free training, become a champion. You build that pressure point around bringing other people along with you when you can show how you practice independently too. And then lastly, my only thought is AMO from a policy standpoint around some of the guidance there. And if you can, I know it talks about liability and insurance in different frameworks, and sometimes that might stop people before they are brought along into moving towards doing something versus nothing, or just the passive approach to signing, but not really looking at just taking a step forward that might be quite easy to do. But I wish you well in that. I hope it goes through. But I think there's also great ways in which maybe we can bring people along in addition to that through different outreach. Happy to help where I can.
Okay, and I think one final question from Councillor Corser.
I guess it's just more of a, through you, Chair, sorry, it's just more of a comment generally. I just wanted to ensure that having this conversation is kind of at a timely this winter, because we are having a salt shortage. So I wouldn't want anyone to misconstrue that we are having this conversation and this is any relation to the road conditions. We are on an outlier year where we are having challenges actually getting any salt onto our roads. So this is not a conversation about, this is not related to the road conditions this year. I just didn't want anyone to misunderstand that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. All right, no further questions that I'm seeing. So thank you to you both. Appreciate your time this evening.
Thanks very much for the thoughtful questions and great suggestions.
Wonderful. All right, brilliant. We will move along in the agenda to item number 6, deferred referred items. There is one referred item listed on tonight's agenda. The item was referred by General Committee meeting on November 26, 2025, concerning the memorandum Sandbox Center Annual Report and Request. Note, there was an additional confidential staff memorandum from S. Schiller, Director of Economic and Creative Development, dated January 28, 2026, concerning a confidential trade secret or scientific, technical, commercial, financial, or labor relations information supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board, which, if disclosed, could reasonably be expected to prejudice significantly the competitive position or interfere significantly with the contractual or other negotiations of a person or group of persons. If required, a confidential memorandum. Okay. Yes, Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. I have a motion to put forward.
Excellent,
If
go
you're
ahead.
okay with that? That the request by the Sandbox to defer their maintenance 33% of the appropriate maintenance and utility where applicable in order to align their lease with the city and their 3-year business plan renew with the province be granted, and that the remittance be phased in over 2 years, with 50% of the full amount applying in 2027, with the other 50% funded from the tax rate stabilization reserve, with full payment starting in 2028. And the remittance commence on April 1st, 2027, subject to the board transition support of the Regional Innovation Center and in executing lease agreement with the city. And final, actually, if you'd like, we could vote on that motion, and then I'll move the second paragraph to that if you'd like, or I can put it all in one, whatever you're comfortable with.
We'll do them separately, I think. So there's no discussion, right, unless we have to move into closed session. We're just voting on the motion as put forward.
We can vote on this in public. The only thing that if you want to discuss in camera is if you want to discuss any of the content of Ms. Schlichter's memo. Otherwise, we do not need to move in camera.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll turn it over to members of committee first to see if they have any questions for Councillor Thompson on the motion that's in front of us. And seeing none, so we'll remain in open session, and that motion is approved upon consent.
And then, oh, my apologies. And follow, upon receipt of the confirmation of the new Regional Innovation Board, members being appointed, Councillor Morales be appointed as a voting representative to the board, and that the Director of Economic Development be appointed to a non-voting member. And I can speak to that very briefly, just for a little bit of explanation.
Okay, and assuming he can speak to the motion in public forum as well.
Yes, you may speak to the public motion in public, but if you want to get into any details, we will have to move in camera.
Thank you for the clarification, Madam Clerk. And go ahead, Councillor Thompson.
So this is basically just reverting back to the way the original composite of the board was. Councilor Morales was appointed to the Sandbox, and the Director of Economic Development was appointed while we were going through the application process. So that's been taken care of, and it's a practice that we started a couple of years ago, that staff don't sit on boards in voting positions to keep conflicts away from report writing and stuff like that. So this is just reverting back to that and appointing Councilor Morales as he was there at the beginning of the term.
Okay, thank you for that added information. I will turn it over to any members of committee to see if they have any questions or comments. And seeing none, we will go ahead and vote on the motion on the floor. All those in favor, yes. And that passes on consent as well. All right, I think that was the last item on our agenda, so I will move us to adjournment. This concludes the Infrastructure and Community Investment Committee meeting. The meeting is adjourned at 6